going to Browns Lake, there's a little lake out of town, about 5 miles out of town, where the original mines were, the Allen and Finch quarries. And while we were swimming, all of a sudden we get a kaboom, 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 and you'd hear the dynamite blasting in the quarry.
That red marble quarry is fascinating. And that's where you see it. And it's like it's an overprint on the carbonate, right?
It is right on the verge of being entirely forgotten about, both in like oral history of the people that have worked there, as well as just some of the video or photos of it are being lost. They're being lost.
This is the story of Washington's magnificent magnesite. It is a story of geology and exploration, of boom and bust cycles, and how a small town produced a crucial mineral supply to the nation during 2 world wars.
Magnesite was used to make fire brick, and the fire brick was used to line the Bessemer furnaces back in Pittsburgh.
Bessemer converters were invented by Sir Henry Bessemer. Introduced in 1856, these elongated furnaces converted pig iron to steel by blowing oxygen through the molten metal, which oxidized impurities for easier removal and reduced the carbon content of iron to produce steel. Domestic production of magnesite was low in the early 1900s, primarily coming out of California. Although some magnesite was used in cement and paper making, the real hungry industry was steel. Between 1 and 5 pounds of processed magnesite was used in making 1 ton of steel. This refractory or heat-resistant mineral lined the furnaces to withstand the 1600 Celsius plus degree temperatures, and not just any magnesite would do. Too pure and it tended to flake away in the furnaces and get poured off in the slag. Too impure and it lost its resistance to heat. The ideal magnesite was imported from Europe, and it had just the right amount of iron impurities to help fuse the fire brick together. It was cheaper to import from overseas than to mine it in the West and ship by rail, which more than doubled the price per ton. With boatloads of good quality, cheap ore coming in, there was little reason to develop the California mines. Just so long as nobody did anything crazy.
All of the magnesite that was used in the making of steel came from Austria. So it was shipped over here across the Atlantic. And of course, as soon as the war started and the United States entered the war, Austria cut off the supply of magnesite.
Maybe I undersold the importance of Austrian magnesite to the United States steel machine. The numbers paint a stark portrait, however, with processed magnesite nosediving after the war started. The United States was forced to scramble to ramp up California production, but there were still those pesky expenses and its less than ideal behavior in the steelmaking process.
So there was a nationwide search for magnesite, and it was found here. So starting in probably 1915, and in the next few years after that, they developed the quarries, and then they made the plant and the tram line and all that kind of stuff. But it supplied rock for World War I and World War II.
In a case study of being in the right place at the right time, in 1915, R.S. Talbot was on the hunt for pure limestone to use in paper production for the Inland Empire Paper Company. Based out of Spokane, Washington, it made sense to search nearby Stevens County. Around the turn of the century, a few marble mines had popped up in the area, but commercial production wasn't viable and the mines failed. The samples Talbot acquired from these old mines and the surrounding area weren't ideal for paper production either. The reason? Too much magnesium. Talbot recognized an opportunity and confirmed the presence of magnesite, quickly pivoting to devote his resources to develop the mines. He wasn't alone. Other prospectors included Professor Wilford M. Handy and Raymond Allen, who in 1916 and 1917 capitalized on old Washington Geological Survey reports to hone in on magnesite localities. The magnesite rush was on to fill the hole in the industrial steel complex. Talbot and Handy at least would find success initially, but that wasn't the case for everyone.
There's the major mines that we know of, things like the Red Marble Mine and the Keystone Mine and the Turk and all these ones that are well documented. But there's also a ton of small workings and prospects out there that were kind of exploratory. So I think the number is pretty big. I think it's pretty big, and there's a lot of just overgrown stuff as well.
Only a handful of those mines were able to produce magnesite long term. The challenges were many. Some of the magnesite deposits were around 4,000 feet in elevation, which is more than 2,000 feet above the nearby town of Chewelah. The magnesite was also found in a long, relatively skinny geologic unit, something like a mile wide by nearly 20 miles long. This forced prospectors higher and farther from civilization.
We checked out the Finch, Keystone, Red Marble, the Turk, the Wells Fargo, the Wild Turkey, obviously. Man, I feel like I might be forgetting some. There's some exposures that are not exactly a mine that we went to. We went to a lot of those. So probably like, I guess, 6 to 8 of them. There are some that are very inaccessible now. Very, very inaccessible. Like, you need a UTV to get to the point where you can have a 5-mile hike. So I don't know how many people are doing any of those. And, there's still some cool things out there that have yet to be rediscovered or explored, documented, whatever. One was the bucket tram system going out of the Red Marble mine, right? Those towers, they're still out there in the woods. And there's no photos of these things.
Those towers are indeed lost to time, but what were they? Well, they tell the story of the rise of R.S. Talbot and the fall of Professor Handy. Talbot created the Washington Magnesite Company, which later became Northwest Magnesite after he attracted investors. Handy teamed up with the American Mineral Production Company, and AMP would go on to acquire the Allen and Moss mines, as well as the Red Marble and a few other smaller deposits down the road. Northwest Magnesite operated the Keystone and Finch deposits. The Finch mine was a stone's throw from the Allen Moss, and so they faced the same problem: how to get tons and tons of rock quickly and cheaply to the nearest town. The mines were about equidistant between the towns of Chewelah and Valley, about 5 or 6 miles or so. Northwest Magnesite chose to operate out of Chewelah, and American Mineral went to Valley.
My mom was a housewife. She stayed at home. My dad was what they called a burner. He was the one who ran the rotary kilns at the plant. His job was to make sure that the mix of coal and magnesite ore was such that it heated at 3,000 degrees, and was able to what they called dead burn the magnesite. Dead burning meant that they took all of the impurities out of it.
It seems like they'd have an equal chance of success, but financial pressures meant American Mineral would be acquired by Northwest Magnesite just a few years later in 1923. Why? Transportation, in part. American Mineral built a 5.5-mile-long rail connecting Valley with the Allen Moss mine to the tune of nearly $500,000. This used up a lot of early working capital, although the train would later do decent business hauling other goods like lumber. But a single track meant waiting for the train on a round trip, and operator salaries and maintenance fees. Every cost had to be recouped down the line, and magnesite producers found themselves battling on the market with other sources like Grenville in Canada and Austria after the war ended, and the steel economists who decided the cheaper, less ideal refractories like dolomite and chromite were just good enough for the hungry furnaces. American Mineral in 1923 sold its mines to Northwest Magnesite, who was still going strong in part thanks to their investment in building an aerial tramway.
The mining operation up there, the quarry operation, they had a 5-mile tram line that went from the quarry to the plant down here on the highway. Buckets ran 24 hours a day, and each bucket was a big square thing, and it held a ton of rock. And so the plant was fed all the time.
Railroads require even grades, cleared forests, and other technical train things that only my 4-year-old nephew knows. Tramways were a series of metal towers that could be relatively quickly assembled on easements. The Northwest Magnesite tram cost barely more than a tenth of the railroad, to the tune of about $60,000. Each bucket held 1,000 pounds of rock, and empty carts were returned while full loads were brought in. The system was built by the Riblet Tramway Company out of Spokane. It was a fairly smooth system that created an iconic scene in Chewelah skyline for many years.
Somebody had to ride a bucket every shift. So 3 times a day, somebody would ride a bucket from the quarry to the plant and back. And rumors have it that during hunting season, a lot of the workers that rode the tram shot their buck.
I've also heard about like the trams rocking in wind and stuff and spilling out. And that's another thing. Like at some point here, those rocks, which are on public land, are just going to be like sinking back into the earth and being buried through, decaying plant matter. And somebody should go out and find all of this stuff.
And there were rotten kids that would stand up there on places where the tram wasn't so high, who would actually throw rocks at the tram and try to trip it. So there was a trip on the side of the bucket, and if you hit it just right, it would empty. Now I wouldn't know any of those kids, but not me. Yeah.
Each ton costs something like 50 cents to haul in from the Finch quarry, as opposed to the $4.50 a ton for trucks bringing material from farther afield red marble and keystone mines. The original tram line was operational by 1918. Other lines were surveyed from the Finch to the Keystone quarries and between the Keystone and red marble mines. Those were erected before 1950, and for the moment you can buy a reproduction of the 1947 proposal by Riblet to build a connecting tram from Keystone to red marble. Speaking of the tram, there is a fantastic reel from 1925 with clips of Washington magnesite mining and the tram system in action. Definitely go give that a watch at the University of South Carolina archives to get a glimpse of how it was back in the day. There's also brief 1960s color footage to go check out from Periscope Films.
People still have piles of rock up there on their property, and also pieces of the tram cable.
Time travel back a little bit. The miners back then basically used the ravines as a landfill. Okay, like they would just like shove stuff down into the ravines. So there's all kinds of cool like old mining relics just like dumped, and it's overgrown. But hey, come fall, right? Leaves are dropping. You can hike out there easily and go explore. You never know what you're going to find out there.
Where did all this magnesite come from? Why is it here in Northeast Washington? And in case you were embarrassed to ask, what is magnesite? Well, some minerals are named after the location where they were first discovered, like ilmenite from the Ilmen Mountains in Russia. Some are named after people, like armalcolite, after Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins, as the titanium oxide was first discovered in lunar rocks returned from the Apollo 11 mission. Others, like magnesite, are more down to earth. Magnesite is a carbonate mineral named very practically after its primary component, magnesium. The "ite" on the end refers to its status as a mineral. Pretty straightforward. Carbonate means the mineral has a carbonate ion in it. These are all generally soft minerals, and many of them serve as important ores, like iron, manganese, and lead. Carbonates are often secondary minerals and form readily by low-temperature hydrothermal alteration.
From what I understand now, this isn't the gospel truth, but from what I understand, most of the veins ran out as one section of rock ran into another section of rock, kind of like an intrusion of something else coming in.
Normally when we think about magnesite, we think about a subduction zone. So there's subduction happening and hydrothermal alteration, and that magnesite is associated, at least the papers that I've seen for magnesite formation is associated with hydrothermal alteration during subduction zone. And we do find a lot of thrusting in that area, probably more of like the belt, or that thrusting is like the Rocky Mountains, so it'd be 150 million years ago. But that's a really good question. I don't know when the magnesite itself entered the rock.
When you're actually out at these mines, it's like a lot of like vertical dikes coming through the geologic formation. So if it is hydrothermal, I guess I would add to that.
The magnesite formed in the Okanagan Highlands, a region with a geologically complex history including some of the state's oldest rocks, world-class uranium minerals, and lots of mines.
I've had a couple of people reach out that were even just trying to locate them, not from a rock hunting perspective, but geologists that reached out and they're like, where exactly is this? Because they're just giving like a broad range and township, and I have GPS'd them, and obviously GPS beats range and township for locality placement.
You have really old rock coming up, and there's granites associated with that as well, like partial melting of the crust due to decompression, probably. And then a lot of mineralization.
There's all kinds of different shales, which that's some of it has neat like banded patterns to it, especially just how some of it has split. You can see that pyrite, lemonite, acenopyrite. Some of the other area mines do have copper minerals. You know, like your malachite, azurite is found within that area, and I mean the magnesite is beautiful. Brucite, those things, different marbles, limestones.
For sure, there are some copper deposits up there. I don't know a whole lot of gold. If you look at the old maps, they should show you. But there are quite a few adits mines in there.
A lot of them are patented claims, and that's something to be, it's treated like private property. But the thing that is interesting is if you overlay satellite imagery with property records, you can see that huge tailing piles just stretch out onto public land. So even though the mine core workings may not be accessible without permission, there's some like see it from space tailings that you can go dig through.
The area has been smooshed and stretched to create several subregions within the Okanagan that could probably each be their own video. For now, let's focus on this slab of a region known as the Magnesite Belt.
The thing about the Deer Trail group and like the Magnesite Belt, which is hosted in there, it's pretty localized area. So like Chewelah area, and it kind of comes down to the Spokane area we're starting to find, is this package of rocks. And your Magnesite Belt is in the Stensgaard Dolomite. And yeah, that's a really good question. I haven't really studied the magnesite itself, but that magnesite was definitely after the belt the Deer Trail group came in this little rift valley.
On paper, it reads like this. The Magnesite Belt is composed mainly of northeast trending, generally westward dipping strata of late Precambrian age, which are intruded by greenstone dikes and sills by the granitic rocks of the Loon Lake batholith. On a map, it looks like this, and this if you want to get fancy. Let's break down that description, which is from a 1970 PhD thesis. Northeast trending means the rocks are exposed along this axis. Westward dipping means the rock layers or strata that were once horizontal have been tilted and folded, and a hypothetical ball on an exposed surface would roll this way. That's important because now up in the geologic sense is now over this way, meaning these are younger layers and these are older ones, which tells you if you find an exposure, you need to go one way or the other to find younger or older rocks. This is all generally speaking, because there are other complicating factors here. Now, the Precambrian is a wicked long eon from the formation of the Earth to about 540 million years ago. Late Precambrian is about 2,500 to 540 million years ago. And then these strata were variably altered by hot rocks. Dikes are vertical or angled intrusions that cut across layers, and sills are horizontal intrusions. A batholith is a huge igneous intrusion more than 100 cubic kilometers in volume. It's often a source of volcanism, though now the underground magma has cooled down and may or may not be exposed by erosion. Half Dome, for example, is part of an eroded batholith. That was just one sentence in this 96-page thesis, so you'll have to excuse me if I gloss over some things moving forward, otherwise I know your eyes will start glossing over too. Why is it like this? Well, the units of interest for our story were all at one point a sediment. When I say at one point, I mean roughly 1.375 billion years ago, when the Earth looked like this.
Starting with the belt supergroup was being deposited in this basin, the rift. The belt basin is what they kind of call it, right? And it kind of it even looks like a triangle to some extent as it's being pulled apart. Some people have seen papers as a back arc basin, so there was some sort of subduction or collisions happening at the Medicine Hat Block down like Wyoming, Montana area. This back arc basin's pulling open, letting sediments dip into it. But eventually you get to this 1.45, you're developing the belt basin pretty good. And then it keeps on going. And I think it's actually a continuation of the belt basin, essentially you're deposited in the Deer Trail group. So it's like just this, the 1.37 deposition of sediments into a basin. And then about 1 billion years ago, that starts to pull apart even more, and that's called the Windermere group, is the next group. And it's pulling apart tectonically and then translocating off. So you're actually moving the whole western shore, what we think now is the western shore of Nuna, and separating it, and that goes off. And that could be Australia or Siberia, we're not exactly sure. Some people are really adamant it's Siberia, some people are adamant it's not, it is Australia. But we go back and we look at the age of the grains, the volcanic rocks, and we have this, what's called the North American Magmatic Gap, the NAMG. That's like the big deal for all of this. Ross and Villeneuve in 1993, I think, were the first people that recognized this age in the belt supergroup, especially. That we have the age of zircon crystals in there, but we don't really have a source in the North American. So we call it the North Magmatic Gap. North American Magmatic Gap, excuse me. Subsequently we have found, like down in the Grand Canyon, there's actually quite a few little plutons in our area that actually match that age. So there's a potential that some of that stuff's homegrown, so to speak. But we like to think that it's probably part of Australia that's zipped across, as plate tectonics does its dance across the planets. So that was part of this Nuna, or Columbia. Pull it apart in your Nordinia. We call it, just at that point, I just call it Laurentia, where we are. I get a little confused in some of the papers. There's lots of different models. But more or less on the west coast of the United States, and Spokane, we're splashing around in the water or on the ocean, these basins, after about a billion years ago. Until 150, when the islands kind of smash on, or even the ocean smashes on Silesia, or Silesia terrain, causing the Rocky Mountains, and Washington, Oregon, most of like western coast of South America, Alaska.
Magnesite is formed by some combination of hydrothermal alteration and maybe contact metamorphism. It's found almost exclusively in the Stensgaard Dolomite, which is part of the Deer Trail group. These strata are part of the same group because they formed in relative sequence. There's a quartzite and argillite/slate unit known as the Togo, then the Edna Dolomite, the McHale Slate, and the Stensgaard Dolomite. The Buffalo Hump Formation used to be grouped in with these, but later study found it was much younger and it's since been separated out. Like Chad said, in Deer Trail time you'd be sloshing around in a shallow sea, and the different units occur as sea levels rose and fell as a result of things like the continent rifting apart and being filled in by sediment and glacial levels changing.
About 150 million years ago, you started the Cordilleran fold and thrust belt. And this is like the Farallon Plate, is where the Pacific Ocean is now. And there was subduction all the way from the south tip of South America all the way up to Alaska. The whole Americas is all one. And there was subduction. So when that subduction happens, you have flux melting, so you release volatiles, it lowers the melting temperature of the mantle, and it causes melt, and that causes magma chambers. And so yeah, you'll have usually about 98 million out here is the first big pluton generation that you have. And that hydrothermal alteration would probably jive pretty good with magnesite formation. So that'd be about 100 million years ago. All the rocks that we did age determination on were about 60 million years old, even the metamorphism itself. But the magnesite, it's pretty fascinating. You do have those dikes. You've seen those dikes, I'm sure, and then pretty big thrust sheets that are probably associated. So I think the 100 million years old is probably about right. That Stensgaard Dolomite is a metamorphosed limestone of some sort. Dolomization does happen. And then this was clearly faulted, put in a solution, so there's beautiful calcite crystals forming. And there's also, on the rims of it, quite a bit of pyritization, so you get chalcopyrite. I think I've seen some arsenopyrite, pyrite for sure. And then magnesite is the redder material. And this doesn't have the most beautiful magnesite in it, but you'll see these beautiful red crystals in the magnesite. Driving up, you'll actually drive on a road and you'll see this, and it's got these boudins of sand and passive little folds within this calcic mud. But there's definitely quartzite layers in there forming those boudins. You can see that it's been pulled apart. So if you're driving up that road, a red marble quarry, if you're going slow, you'll drive up and you get to the Wabash Detroit, which almost looks like petrified wood. It's this argillite, it's like a mudstone that's been sheared so much that it looks, and I have some samples here if you want to see them. It's just really, really fine grained material. And there's some beautiful faults, it's really brittle. These faults, here is that McHale slate. This doesn't quite show the light and dark as well, but it's pretty thinly laminated. Slaty material, not the best. But if you go to the outcrop, it's pretty cool. You'll see that light and dark. You come around the corner and you'll see the base of the quarry. I don't think they mine that actively right now, but you'll see this beautiful thrust fault where the dolomite's getting thrust over. Maybe Addy there? I'm not sure. You'd have to look at a map. But you can see the red marble material in there. But then if you drive up, that's the classic opening. And it is active. Last time I was up there were trucks moving around, so we couldn't go in the quarry. But BLM property is the tailings pile. So if you go up and look at those old photos of the magnesite quarry, it's huge. I mean, they have taken that whole mountaintop off. It's crazy. And the spoils have just gone off the edge. And so they've made, there's gonna be hundreds of acres of land just from like tailings piles. And so that's all BLM property.
Most of the places that we go to, I lean on the old documents, the old papers that were written about these places from, the 1960s or whenever, that have now been scanned. And I convert the range and township to GPS. And then I start honing in through satellite imagery, public land records, and try to like read the tea leaves as to how I can get out to these spots, because it's definitely not clear, right? Like, at best you have some Forest Service road numbers, and who knows what the condition is that you're going to show up to. And it's fun. It feels like you're rediscovering a place, even if somebody may have gone out there a couple years ago.
So you can go look and you'll see like the chunks of the mafic intrusive rock, and you'll see a lot of the leftover magnesite. It's like a red kind of crystal.
The interesting thing from the perspective of somebody that collects rocks is some of the more interesting pieces were actually discarded. Okay. If you have like just a rock and half of it's like a limestone marble and the other half is magnesite, that's not really what they went for at like the core of like the mining operation. That would be just chucked aside in the pile. But from somebody that likes cool rocks, having something that is like that with maybe acenopyrite, like going through it in little seams, is really interesting. And it's nice that they weren't into it.
When I talk to people about that, red marble is a really big draw. There's a serpentinite, and I'm not sure what that's actually deforming. Is it wild turkey?
I first learned about the magnesite belt and that whole area through the wild turkey mine, right? I think that was probably one of the first. I knew that the mine existed. This predates the current owner and the ability to go there for the feed eggs and collect serpentine. That was kind of my first exposure. I saw these photos online of this bright green rock, and I started to dig into it. I'm like, oh, they weren't really there for the serpentine. Like, serpentine is cool and it's pretty and it has lapidary purposes, but from a profitable mining operation, it's not exactly it. It's in the magnesite or grinding up for aggregate, limestone, marble, those types of things. And that kind of led me down a big rabbit hole of exploring this geologically interesting place, as well as a historically significant mining district that in many ways I think has kind of been forgotten about, or it's been lost to time a little bit.
When the Bessemer process became outdated and was replaced by other processes to turn iron into steel, there was no need to have magnesite anymore. And so especially since it had to be shipped all the way from Chewelah, Washington to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, it became obsolete, so to speak. He worked there before World War II, and when he got back from World War II, he went back to work there, and he worked there until 1968 when the plant shut down. The kilns were rotary kilns. They were like a paper towel tube, and they were kind of slanted. And at one end, they'd put in the coal and the ore, and then these things would rotate slowly. And as they rotated, the ore and the coal would burn all the way down to the bottom. The furnaces were so hot that you actually couldn't look into the furnace because it would make you blind. It would dump out and then go onto a belt and then go up into the cooling bins. They started with 4, and they were probably 8 feet in diameter. And then later on, they put in 2 more. They must have been 10 feet in diameter. But there were 6 kilns on the bottom floor. And then later on, they put in what they called number 7. Number 7 was a gigantic thing. And instead of being right down on the floor of the plant, it was actually like elevated like 20 feet into the air. and it rotated the very same way, but it was gigantic. The thing about that I remember especially about the about number 7 was that it had a skipulator. Now, a skipulator, when the rock fell into out of the kiln, it fell into this trough, and it kind of rocked back and forth like this. And as it did, the ore would kind of jump into the air like 3 or 4 inches as it traveled down the skipulator. So by the time it got to the end, it was already cool enough to go up into the storage units, storage tanks. The sound, especially, you could hear the sound of the rock rotating inside the kilns, and especially when they put number 7 in. You could, the first thing you heard when you got out of the car was the sound of the skipulator and all this dead burnt rock going up and down, and then of course you could hear the sound of the rock inside the kiln later as you got closer to the plant.
The magnesite ore market wasn't like gold and silver. Demand for ore fluctuated with the steel market and with competition from overseas sources. Some newspapers originally painted a very rosy picture, promising like 5,000 jobs in the area. In reality, something like 300 to 350 were employed at the Chewelah plant. Sometimes only half that number during periods of low demand, but the plant remained a constant presence in the town. In the early 1960s, magnesite saw some of its best years ever, and the town of Chewelah was perfectly positioned for
unemployment. Now I know that's kind of funny, but in 1968, when the magnesite plant shut down, 350 people lost their jobs, and a lot of people had to move away from Chewelah to find employment. Some of them went to the magnesium plant in Spokane, and went to other plants owned by Harbison Walker, who owned the plant. And my dad went to work in Spokane, and then he went to work at the uranium plant on the Spokane Indian Reservation. But it was a really hard time for Chewelah because all of the people who worked there lost their jobs. The kilns were dismantled. The towers for the tram line were all dismantled and sold for scrap iron. Anything that could be sold at the plant and at the mill up at the quarry that could be sold was sold. And then the rest of it was scrapped. A lot of the buildings were torn down. There's still maybe a building or two up there, but not very many. But what used to be a big facility just pretty well it's disappeared. All you see now as you drive by the magnesite plant is you can see the bins where the rock were stored in the area which is called the shipping area where gondolas and were loaded with magnesite. The rest of it, the guts of the plant are all gone. On the other side of that, where the kilns used to be, is just used now by another company that uses that area, but they just crush the rock, bag it, and sell it. In the early 1970s, maybe even 1972, Chewelah was chosen as an all-American city because the people of the town resurrected the town, so to speak, brought in some new industries, and kept the town alive rather than turning it into a ghost town.
I don't live in Washington anymore, unfortunately, but if I come back, I'm definitely heading out to the Magnesite Belt. It's such a cool area with such rich history and mineralization to it. I felt like we only explored a small portion of it. From the perspective of somebody that wants to do lapidary work, cutting, polishing, making things out of stones, the marble, limestone, magnesite, all of that is very underrated. It takes an amazing polish. It's beautiful material. And just even have some of the magnesite or brucite in your collection from there, it is very unique. And I think anybody would be wise to go out and try to get some of this material, which you definitely can. You can definitely drive out to some of these mines. Some of them are public, and you can locate some of this material. So I would encourage anybody out there to go spend some time exploring the area.
There are many places to explore in the magnesite belt. The Red Marble Mine has come up a number of times, and I did go check it out, but only from the entrance because it is private land and an active quarry. The samples I collected are from the road and nearby BLM land. The Finch and Allen Moss quarries are also on private property, as are a number of other historical mines. There are indeed BLM lands where you can go and collect for personal use, which I won't get into here in case ownership or collecting rights change down the road. Pull up some maps and cross-reference with the resources I've used here, and soon you'll find yourself surrounded by Washington's magnificent magnesite.
I do have a favorite piece. I have a nice piece about this big, and one half is perfectly red marble, and the other half is magnesite. And between the two, there is a seam of pyrite splitting them.
You brought back a lot of memories of actually seeing the kilns run and hearing the sound of the rock and hearing the sound of the skipulator and that kind of stuff. It brought back some good memories.